The committee meets today to receive testimony on U.S. strategy in the Middle East, and I want to thank our distinguished witnesses for appearing this morning and for their service to our nation. Before I proceed, I'd like to remind our witnesses this committee's rules require written testimony to be submitted 24 hours in advance of a hearing, and I'd like from now on to try for our witnesses to try to adhere to that. The tragic loss last week of Master Sergeant Joshua Walker, a veteran of 14 combat deployments, reminds us of the high stakes of our mission in the Middle East and how grateful we are to those Americans serving there. We need a strategy worthy of those who carry it out, and unfortunately, we don't have that. What's worse, it appears the administration has not even defined the problem correctly. A policy of ISIL first fails to understand that ISIL, for all of the threat it poses, is actually just a symptom of a deeper problem, the struggle for power and sectarian identity now raging across the Middle East, the epicenter of which is Iraq and Syria. That is why ISIL exists today with the strength that it does, and this problem will only get worse the longer this conflict rages on. We hear it said all the time, quote, "There is no military solution to this problem," which is a truism, but that too is misleading. The real problem is that there can be no diplomatic solution without leverage, and there is a clear military dimension to this problem. Secretary Kerry can take all the trips he wants to Geneva, but unless the military balance of power changes on the ground, diplomacy, as has been amply proven, will achieve nothing. Changing those conditions is what the administration has consistently failed to do. Instead, it has assumed our nation could withdraw from the Middle East and avoid the conflict at its heart. Moreover, on those occasions when the administration has felt compelled to respond, after the use of chemical weapons, for example, or with the rise of ISIL, and now amid the worst refugee crisis in Europe since World War II, the administration has merely addressed the symptoms of the underlying problem rather than the problem itself, and all too often made that problem worse. There is no clearer example of this than the Syrian Train and Equip program. From the start, the administration said the fighters in this program could only fight ISIL, not Assad's forces, which have slaughtered and displaced exponentially more Syrians than ISIL has. In addition, the administration made no commitment until only recently to provide these forces with any meaningful military support once they returned to Syria. After millions of dollars and months of effort, the program failed to come anywhere close to the department's original expectations. The President has expressed surprise about this failure. It was not a surprise. It was completely predictable, and many of us here did predict it. Only someone who does not understand the real problem, which is the underlying conflict in Syria and Iraq, or does not care to, could think that we could effectively recruit and train large numbers of Sunni Syrians to fight only against ISIL, with no promise of coalition assistance if they came under fire from Assad's forces. Rather than fixing the problem, the President suspended it. But this is tantamount to killing the program because it's destroying what little trust our Syrian partners have left in us, to say nothing of allies like Turkey and Jordan, which invested their own money and prestige in this program. The President now says, incredibly, failure of this program, his program, the President's program, proves he was right for not wanting to do it in the first place. Harry Truman must be spinning in his grave. If there is an opposite for Commander-in-Chief, this is it. The training effort in Iraq has its own challenges. Indeed, it is deja vu all over again. We don't have enough U.S. forces to train and advise Iraqi units at the right levels. We're still not providing sufficient support to Sunni tribes, which are the center of gravity in this fight against ISIL. We're looking the other way as Shia militias go on the offensive in the Sunni heartland. We hear complaints that Iraqis have no will to fight, but we're prohibiting U.S. forces from bolstering their will to fight by advising them in combat are calling in airstrikes. We learned all of these lessons in Iraq just a few years ago, and apparently we have to relive these failures now. For nearly 7 years, the administration has tried to extract America from the Middle East. Instead, we have created a massive power vacuum that has been filled by ISIL, al-Qaeda, and its affiliates on the one hand, and Iran and its proxies on the other. Now, into this vacuum has stepped Vladimir Putin. Putin's intervention in Syria really began in Ukraine. The administration's failure to impose greater costs on Russia, particularly by providing defensive arms to Ukrainian forces, allowed Putin to annex Crimea, dictate the terms of a frozen conflict in eastern Ukraine, and then pivot to Syria. It's also confirmed Putin's belief that the administration is weak, and to Putin, weakness is provocative. The administration's response thus far to Russia's intervention in Syria has only made this problem worse. First, it urged Russia not to build up its forces in Syria. Putin ignored these warnings. The administration then tried to deny Russia the airspace to move into Syria and failed. Putin responded by bombing moderate Syrian forces, many of whom are allied with the United States. And what has been the result? The number of U.S. airstrikes in Syria has dropped. The train and equip program in Syria was halted, just as it was starting to show some battlefield results. And the administration scrambled to pen a so-called deconfliction agreement with the Russians that spells out more of what we will not do in Syria. Indeed, this agreement means the United States is now moving out of the way and watching as Russian aircraft, together with Iranian, Hezbollah, and Assad's ground forces, attack and kill brave Syrians, many of whom our nation has supported and encouraged. This is not only harmful to our interests, it is immoral. What we must do to hasten the end of the conflict in Syria and Iraq, in particular, we must stop Assad's use of air power and his horrific barrel bombs, which are the major killer of Syrians and driver of refugees out of the region. We must establish areas in Syria where civilians can be safe and do what is necessary to protect these areas in the air and on the ground. We must recognize that Putin is not interested in a negotiated solution in Syria that favors U.S. interests. So we should instead impose real costs on Russia, not just in Syria, but everywhere we have leverage to do so. Finally, as General David Petraeus has recently said, we must devise a strategy to confront Iranian power and designs in the region rather than acquiescing to them. Some will object, as they have for years, that we cannot bear the cost of these actions, but consider the cost of our current inaction and half measures. Mass atrocities in Syria will continue. Our allies and partners in the Middle East will be put at greater risk of existential danger. Europe will continue to be destabilized and consumed by the internal challenge of managing the refugee challenge. The cancer of ISIL will grow more potent and spread across more of the Middle East, Africa, and Asia, posing a greater threat to our national security. Iran will be emboldened in its pursuit of its malign regional ambitions. Putin will establish Russia as a dominant military power in the Middle East for the first time in 4 decades, and all the while, America's credibility and influence will continue to erode. Make no mistake, this is the course we're now on. This will be the consequences of our current policy. No one believes there are easy answers to the underlying problems in the Middle East, but this much should be clear. We cannot go on pretending that we can somehow avoid these problems, or that the current approach of trying to treat the symptoms of the disease rather than its cause will work if only we give it more time. It will not. Policies of gradual escalation never do. Senator Reid.
You want to do quorum?
No. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me join the Chairman in welcoming back the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Thank you, gentlemen, for your service. Today's hearings comes in the midst of a series of events altering the security situation in the Middle East. These include a massive wave of refugees fleeing the continued violence on the ground in Syria and Iraq, the deployment of Russian air and ground forces in Syria, the suspected ISIL attack in Turkey that killed over 100 people and injured hundreds more during a peace rally in Ankara, And the deployment, recently Lieutenant General McFarland, the new commander of Operation Inherent Resolve, Secretary Kerry's recent meetings with the foreign ministers of Russia, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia. In addition, the hearing also comes only weeks before the G20 summit in Turkey, where these issues and the international response will be at the forefront. General McFarland has been in the command of military operations in Syria and Iraq for a little more than 45 days. I understand that he has used this time to evaluate the situation on the ground and may be recommending changes to the campaign. General McFarland's arrival comes at a critical time as the coalition military campaign requires a reevaluation of our strategy. In Syria, the coalition faces a series of intermingled conflicts, including the counter-ISIL fight, the Syrian civil war, a regional proxy war between the Gulf states and Iran, a sectarian Sunni-Shia conflict, our counterterrorism fight, and with the intervention of Russia, a potential great power struggle. Considering these challenges, it is important that we continually assess the role of our nation's military in helping to bring about the conditions for an acceptable and sustainable settlement. In Iraq, the recent visit by Chairman Dunford and General Ashton have focused attention on the coalition's effort to train and equip the Iraqi security forces. However, taken as a whole, the ISF have not shown the will to make necessary advances in the operation to take Ramadi, for example. And the political leaders in Baghdad have not made the progress needed in the broader agenda of improving the inclusiveness of the Iraqi government and addressing the long-standing grievances of Kurds, Sunnis, moderate Shia, and minorities. The recent operation by Kurdish Peshmerga forces, accompanied by U.S. Special Operations Forces in northern Iraq, despite the tragic loss of one of our finest soldiers, demonstrated that such targeted efforts can have significant success in protecting innocent civilians and degrading ISIL. These kinds of operations can also result in critical intelligence to support the coalition's broader campaign against ISIL. While these operations are obviously not without risk, the time may have come to evaluate whether the tempo of such counter-ISIL operations can be increased and whether our troops can play an even more active role in enabling the ISF, including by accompanying their forces at lower echelons, especially when direct contact with the enemy is not expected. According to reports, the coalition's provisions of close air support to Syrian Kurdish forces have shown success in northern Syria. The recent decision by the administration to equip a group of Sunni tribes who have come together to form a Syrian Arab coalition to fight alongside Syrian Kurdish forces shows promise for placing additional pressure on ISIL in Raqqa and the surrounding areas. If successful, this would be a positive development towards the objectives of the broader campaign. However, I am concerned that the decision to completely suspend the department's overt training and equipment program may not enable us to accomplish our goals in Syria. While the program clearly failed to live up to heightened expectations, my understanding is that the Combined Joint Interagency Task Force had recently recalibrated the program based on lessons learned, and that later graduates today having a direct impact as enablers in the fight against ISIL. The coalition cannot succeed in Syria without a reliable Sunni force on the ground to hold any territorial gains. Building this force will require time and patience, and critically, it will require the building of trust through training engagements and persistent contact between the coalition and our new partners on the ground. I hope the Secretary and the Chairman will provide the Committee a clear understanding of the conditions required to re-engage in training of vetted individuals or small groups. The deployment of Russian forces into Syria and their indiscriminate military operations targeting the moderate opposition have the potential to set off another wave of refugees across Europe. More specifically, Russia's military operations in Syria have complicated the coalition air campaign and have the potential to draw the attention of moderate Syrian opposition forces away from counter-ISIL operations. Russian operations have also negatively impacted the distribution of humanitarian and other non-lethal aid to the Syrian people. In the coming months, I hope General McFarland will be provided with the operational flexibility to implement necessary modifications to the campaign against ISIL. Secretary Carter and Chairman Dunford, I would be interested in your recommendations for how to ensure that General McFarland receives the operational flexibility and support needed to be successful going forward. Thank you, and I look forward to your testimony.
Welcome the witnesses. Secretary Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member Reed, members of the committee, thanks for inviting us to come here today before you to discuss the counter-ISIL campaign in Iraq and Syria, and along the way to address some of the concerns, Mr. Chairman, that you raised, and to share with you, Senator Reed, some of the plans and initiatives that the Chairman and I are formulating for our campaign in both Iraq and Syria. This is the first time for me appearing before this committee alongside Chairman Joe Dunford, who was just in the region last week, as was noted. I'm grateful to Joe for answering my and the President's call to step down from what every Marine knows is a higher position, namely Commandant of the Marine Corps, to become Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And to this committee for confirming Joe. Thank you. I'm glad to have him here with me today. Before I turn to the subject of today's hearing, I want to reiterate, as I've said consistently since March and continue to believe, that Washington needs to come together behind a multi-year budget deal that supports our defense strategy, the troops and their families, and all elements of Americans' national security and strength. I understand significant progress was made on this overnight, and I'm looking forward to reviewing the details. But I welcome this major positive development and applaud the members of this committee for what you're doing to help us get there. The Middle East presents a kaleidoscope of challenges, but there, as everywhere, our actions and strong military posture are guided by what's in America's interests. That's our North Star. And amid this region's complexity and uncertainty, those interests are to deter aggression, to bolster the security of our friends and allies, especially Israel, to ensure freedom of navigation in the Gulf, to check Iran's malign influence, even as we monitor the implementation of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, and to degrade and ultimately defeat ISIL. This last one, ISIL, poses a threat to our people and to friendly countries, not only in the Middle East, but around the world. Today, I will first outline the changes in the execution of our strategy that we have considered and are now pursuing militarily to gather battlefield momentum in the fight against ISIL. Then I'll address what Russia is doing in Syria and why we won't let it interfere with our campaign against ISIL. When I last spoke to this committee about our counter-ISIL campaign and its 9 lines of essential military and non-military effort, I made 3 things clear about the military aspects. First, that we will deliver ISIL a lasting defeat. Second, that truly lasting success would require enabling capable, motivated local forces on the ground, recognizing that this will take time and new diplomatic energy. And third, that our strategy's execution can and must and will be strengthened. All of that's still true. Our determination is unchanged, even as the situation continues to evolve, and we continue to adapt to execute our campaign more effectively. And today I'd like to elaborate on the third point and explain how we're adapting our campaign to do more, reinforcing what we know works. The changes we're pursuing can be described by what I call the 3 R's: Raqqa, Ramadi, and raids. Before I explain what they mean, let me also note that I took actions to streamline command and control of the counter-ISIL military campaign by assigning the entire effort to a single general officer, Lieutenant General Sean McFarland, where in the urgency of the early phase of the campaign last year, several layers were added to the general officer already present in Iraq. The first R is Raqqa, ISIL's stronghold and administrative capital. We've been clear for some time that we need to keep up pressure on Raqqa, and to that end, we will support moderate Syrian forces fighting ISIL that have made territorial gains near Raqqa. Indeed, some of them are within 30 miles of Raqqa today. The Syrian Arab coalition, which we plan to strengthen through our new equipping approach, more on that in a moment, will work over time with other Syrian anti-ISIL forces to push towards Raqqa. To the south, we plan to further strengthen our partner Jordan. And from the skies above, we expect to intensify our air campaign, including with additional U.S. and coalition aircraft, to target ISIL with a higher and heavier rate of strikes. This will include more strikes against ISIL high-value targets as our intelligence improves. Also, its oil enterprise, which is a critical pillar of ISIL's financial infrastructure. As I said last Friday, we've already begun to ramp up these deliberate strikes. Part of this pressure includes our new approach to the Syria Train and Equip program. I, like President Obama and members of this committee, was disappointed with that program's results. We accordingly examined the program this summer and have since changed it. I use the word change, not end, change the program. While the old approach was to train and equip completely new forces outside of Syria before sending them into the fight, the new approach is to work with vetted leaders of groups that are already fighting ISIL and provide equipment and some training to them and support their operations with air power. This approach builds on successes that local Syrian Arab and Syrian Kurdish forces have made along Syria's northern border to retake and hold ground from ISIL with the help of U.S. airstrikes and equipment resupplies. If done in concert, as we intend, all these actions on the ground and from the air should help shrink ISIL's territory into a smaller and smaller area and create new opportunities for targeting ISIL, ultimately denying this evil movement any safe haven in its supposed heartland. The second R is Ramadi, the capital of Iraq's Anbar province, which serves as a critical example of the Abadi government's commitment to work with local Sunni communities with our help to retake and hold ground from ISIL, and in turn to build momentum to eventually go northward to Mosul. Under Prime Minister Abadi's leadership, the Iraqis have begun to use American-made F-16s to support counter-ISIL operations and have empowered capable battlefield commanders to step forward. As we see more progress towards assembling capable and motivated Iraqi forces under Baghdad's control and including Sunni elements, we're willing to continue to provide more enabling capabilities and fire support to help them succeed. However, the Iraqi government and security forces will have to take certain steps militarily to make sure our progress sticks. We need to see more in the direction of multi-sectarian governance and defense leadership. For example, we've given the Iraqi government 2 battalions worth of equipment for mobilizing Sunni tribal forces. As we continue to provide this support, the Iraqi government must ensure it is distributed effectively. Local Sunni forces aren't sufficiently equipped, regularly paid, and empowered as co-equal members of the Iraqi security forces. ISIL's defeats in Anbar will only be temporary. The third and final R is raids, signaling that we won't hold back from supporting capable partners in opportunistic attacks against ISIL or conducting such missions directly, whether by strikes from the air or direct action on the ground. Last week's rescue operation was led by Iraqi Kurdish forces with U.S. advisors and support. One of those accompanying advisors, Master Sergeant Joshua Wheeler, heroically acted to ensure the overall success of the mission and lost his life in the process. The death of any service member is a tragedy, and as I told his family and teammates this weekend, we offer our condolences to Master Sergeant Wheeler's loved ones for their loss. While our mission in Iraq is to train, advise, and assist our Iraqi partners in situations such as that operation, where we have actionable intelligence and a capable partner force, we want to support our partners, and we will. At the same time, the raid on Abu Sayyaf's home, the strikes against Junaid Hussein, and most recently Sanafi al-Nasser should all serve notice to ISIL and other terrorist leaders that once we locate them, no target is beyond our reach. As we've looked at how to gather momentum and adapt to the changing battlefield, some have discussed putting a buffer zone, humanitarian zone, or no-fly zone in Syria. We have analyzed various options and the political and military requirements of each. These options are complex and raise some challenges, which I'm prepared to discuss in answer to your questions. Let me now turn to Russia's involvement in Syria. To be clear, we are not cooperating with Russia, and we're not letting Russia impact the pace or scope of our campaign against ISIL in Iraq and Syria. While we negotiated a document on safety of flight with the Russian Minister of Defense, we do not align ourselves more broadly with their military actions because instead of singularly attacking ISIL, as they said they were going to do, They're primarily attacking the Syrian opposition, as the chairman has noted, which further fuels the tragic civil war there. Their actions suggest a doubling down on their long-standing relationship with Assad, sending advisors, artillery, and aviation to enable and support the Assad regime and Iranian forces in attacking moderates who oppose the regime and are essential to Syria's political transition. And it appears the vast majority of their strikes, by some estimates as high as 85 to 90%, use dumb bombs, which obviously increases the possibility of civilian casualties. So as Russia acts in a coalition of two with Iran at its side, the United States will continue to strengthen our 65-nation global coalition. Even as we've reached an understanding with the Russians on safety protocols for coalition pilots over Syria, we will keep prosecuting our counter-ISIL campaign unabated. We will keep supporting the moderate Syrian opposition, along with our other commitments to friends and allies in the region. And consistent with our strong and balanced approach towards Russian aggression elsewhere in the world, including NATO and Ukraine, we will keep the door open for Russia to contribute to efforts towards a political solution, which in the final answer analysis is the only answer to the Syrian conflict. I've discussed the military strategy and accompanying campaign, but before I conclude, I remind the committee that defeating ISIL and protecting America requires coordinated efforts across all of the so-called 9 lines of effort, to include supporting effective governance in Iraq, enhancing intelligence collection, disrupting ISIL's financing, countering ISIL's messaging, stopping the flow of foreign fighters, providing humanitarian support, and protecting our homeland, where other departments and agencies of our government have the lead. Thank you.
Chairman McCain, Ranking Member Reed, distinguished members of the committee, thanks for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss our challenges in the Middle East, and specifically the military dimension of our campaign against ISIL. I've been in my current position for just short of 4 weeks and spent much of that time reviewing our counter-ISIL campaign. I also followed up on the commitment I made in my confirmation hearing to visit the region early in my tenure. Last weekend, to get a personal perspective on the campaign, I visited Israel, Jordan, and Iraq. I was extremely impressed with the focus and commitment of our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines that I met during the visit, and thanks to your support, I can report that they are well-trained and equipped. Before taking your questions, I'd like to share a few thoughts on the counter-ISIL military campaign in Iraq and Syria. ISIL's primary source of strength is its claim to be a caliphate. To be successful, the coalition's military campaign must reduce ISIL's territorial control, destroy its warfighting capability, and undermine its brand and aura of invincibility. There are 2 critical elements of the military campaign. The first is to conduct strikes against ISIL targets. The strikes are intended to kill key leadership and fighters, interdict their lines of communication, and deny them sources of revenue. The second critical element in the military campaign is to develop and support effective partners on the ground to seize and secure ISIL-held terrain. Many weeks before I became the chairman, the leadership across the department recognized that we needed to increase pressure on ISIL from multiple directions to generate momentum in the coalition's military campaign. As with any campaign, we're continuing to examine ways to enhance the effectiveness of our operations. While we all recognize that ISIL is a trans-regional threat requiring a broader strategy, the immediate priority is to bear down on core ISIL across Iraq and Syria simultaneously. The framework for the campaign is the same for Iraq and Syria, but the conditions on the ground present unique challenges and opportunities. The end state is to defeat ISIL. Without a partner on the ground, Syria has clearly presented the most difficult challenge. No one is satisfied with our progress to date. Moving forward, we must continue to work with our Turkish partners to secure the northern border of Syria. We must do all we can to enable vetted Syrian opposition forces willing to fight ISIL, and we must be more aggressive in strikes that will deny ISIL the access they have to oil revenue. The Secretary has already addressed the adjustments to the Syrian Train and Equip program, and I support the refined approach. While there will be challenges, we'll be supporting groups who have already demonstrated the will to fight ISIL, and our support will be contingent upon their attacking specific objectives in meeting specific standards. We'll look for opportunities to support vetted opposition groups in both the north and along the border with Jordan. In our initial efforts to build ground forces in Syria, Major General Mike Nagata and his team were operating under extraordinarily difficult conditions, and I'd like to thank them for their hard work. Due to their efforts, we have a much better understanding of the operating environment and the opportunities. We'll be able to leverage their initiative and lessons learned as we make course and speed corrections. Last week, we began to move the campaign forward in another important way by striking a major oil facility and source of revenue for ISIL. Based on some superb analytic work and planning, CENTCOM is now postured to accelerate broader interagency efforts against ISIL's economic means. The Central Command is also continuing to work with Turkey to secure the border area in northwest Syria, and we still have some work to do. In Iraq, we've also been frustrated with the pace of operations. That said, there's been recent progress in Baji, some movement around Ramadi, and the Peshmerga have made progress in the north. After talking to the commanders on the ground, I believe we'll have an opportunity to reinforce Iraqi success in the days ahead. We've developed a variety of options to do that. To be successful in Syria and Iraq, in addition to the initiatives I've mentioned and those outlined by the Secretary, we also need to continue to improve how we leverage our intelligence capabilities and do more to cut the flow of foreign fighters. I have a better understanding of these two issues after my visit, and those will be a priority for me in the days ahead. We'll also continue to look hard at other ways to increase the effectiveness of coalition operations and the tempo of the campaign. The Secretary and the President have made it clear that they expect me to bring to them all of the options that may contribute to our winning the fight against ISIL. I've made a commitment to them that I would do that, and I'll meet that commitment. In closing, as I complete my initial assessment of the campaign, I believe we've identified and started to implement a number of initiatives to move the campaign forward. We're not satisfied or complacent about where we are, and we won't be satisfied until ISIL is defeated. Thank you again for the opportunity to join you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, General. Secretary Carter, the President's spokesman, after it was clear that the Arm and Train and Equip by the DoD program had failed, the President's spokesman said that the President felt vindicated that this program had failed because he never supported it to start with. This was a program that we invested $43 million at least of a $500 million program. I'm not sure how many young people were killed in trying to implement this failed program. Did you feel vindicated when this program failed?
Mr. Chairman, I thought that the effort, I want to repeat something that the Chairman just said. I think that General Nagata, who was given this program, which was conceived last summer.
I just asked the question whether you felt vindicated or not.
No, I was disappointed.
President's spokesman.
No, I was disappointed in it. I wished it had turned out differently. However, we are learning our lessons from that, and therefore our new approach differs in a fundamental way from, and I can describe the difference between the old and the new, but we think that we have learning lessons from that.
So you don't feel vindicated that the program failed?
I was disappointed that it failed.
I see. But the President obviously wasn't. He felt vindicated, according to his spokesperson, in this change that you were talking about, and already we're seeing some of the changes. Does that mean that we, these young people that we train and equip and send in to fight, that we're going to protect them from being barrel bombed and attacked by Russian aircraft?
I think we have conveyed the same obligation last time I was before you.
Right now, as we speak, Russian aircraft are bombing. Right now, as we speak, Russian aircraft are bombing moderate Syrian forces in Syria while we have deconflicted. Do you believe that we should be protecting those young people?
Our Title 10 forces, we have an obligation to protect. We've stated that. We will have options to do that. We have authority to do that.
Are we protecting them now?
They have not come. They're operating in it. They have not come under attack by either Assad's forces or Russia's forces.
Russia's air has not been attacking.
The Syrian Arab Coalition and the Kurdish YPG.
No, I'm asking about the moderate Syrian forces that are there, some of whom we train.
I was speaking of our trained
I'm asking the question about those that some of those we trained and equipped, moderate Syrian forces that are now being bombed by Russia.
With respect to the Title X forces that the Department of Defense trains and equips in Syria, they have not come under attack, but we have expressed...
None of the moderate forces, that some of whom we have trained, have come under attack by Russia from the air?
Not in our train and equip program, our Title X program, no.
It's fascinating.
But let me be clear, Chairman, the Russians and obviously Assad do attack moderate Syrian forces,
Yes,
which are supported
primarily.
by the international coalition. And one of the reasons why the Russian approach is so
So are we going to train?
wrong-headed.
Are we going to train these young people, you say, in the change? Are we going to send them into Syria to fight? Are we going to protect them from being barrel bombed by Bashar Assad and protected from Russians?
Yes, the ones that we
Anyone we
train
send in
equip,
and
we have
train,
that
we're going to
obligation.
protect from Russian air attacks.
We have an obligation to do that, and we've made that clear right from the beginning of the train and equip
We
program.
haven't done it. We haven't done
They've
it,
not come under
Secretary
attack,
Carter.
but
I promise you they have. We will. You will have to correct the record. Now, General Petraeus and former Secretary Gates, and now we understand Secretary Clinton have all stated that they think we should stop the barrel bombing, and that we should train and equip, and we should have no-fly zone or aircraft exclusionary zones. And I might point out, General Dunford, as complicated as it is, we were able to do Northern Watch and Southern Watch rather successfully in Iraq, although it's not exactly the same. So are you recommending that we should stop the barrel bombing, as General Petraeus and former Secretary Gates and now Secretary Clinton have suggested, to stop the barrel bombing, to provide an aircraft exclusionary zone, in order to protect the innocent civilians that are being driven into refugee status in the greatest refugee situation since the end of World War II?
Yeah, Chairman, we have, as I indicated in my statement, analyzed zones of various kinds, and humanitarian zones, buffer zones, and you're talking about no-fly zones, and I can give you some of the considerations.
And stop the barrel bombing.
That would be one of the intents of a no-fly zone. And if you'd like, I can tell you some of the considerations that go into
I'd just
that.
like
We
to know
have
whether
formulated
you
that.
support or not.
We have not made that recommendation to the President. He has not taken it off the table. I can explain some of the reasons for our recommendation or our
It's not an issue that has not been examined, Secretary Carter. It's been recommended for years by some of us. I mean, you have to examine it all over again.
We've looked at it quite closely, and I'm prepared to describe it. I know the Chairman is as well.
It's an issue that's been on the table for 3 or 4 years that I know of. It's not, we received information when General Dempsey said it would cost $1 billion a day or something incredible, but it's not a new issue.
It is not a new issue. It is a substantial military
So
undertaking.
it seems to me you should have a position on it.
We have not recommended that. We have analyzed it. We've presented the alternative.
So you do not
to the President.
support,
We're not-
you do not agree with General Petraeus and former Secretary Gates and Secretary Clinton?
We do not have a concept of operations for a no-fly zone at this time that we're prepared
After all these years, we don't have a concept of operations.
that we're prepared to recommend.
Senator Reid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just, Mr. Secretary, want to clarify. You have spoken exclusively about forces trained by the Department of Defense. You kept Title X, but a lot of titles in the U.S. Code. But there are other forces on the ground that our coalition partners have trained that have come under attack by the Russians. That's clear, correct?
Absolutely true.
But the forces that are subject to direct training by the Department of Defense have been placed in areas which, for many reasons, have not been subject to aerial attack.
Well, they're fighting ISIL.
They're fighting ISIL.
And the Russians, as I stated, are not, even though they said they were.
Now, let me go back to the points you made about the train and equip program. It has shifted from trying to train individual units, insert those units into the counter-ISIL fight, to identifying leaders and providing some training to the leader and then some support. There's another aspect of this approach, which I'd like to clarify. That is training not just leaders, but individual enablers, people with technical skills that can go into a deployed unit and provide those skills. Is that still being done?
Yes, that is still part of the approach. That was part of the old approach as well. But the big difference is that rather than trying to form brand new units, we're identifying units that are already fighting ISIL, providing them equipment, and as you point out, after vetting their leadership, providing them with selected abilities that help them leverage our enablement, particularly from the air.
From the air. So the program still is able to do that, and in addition, grow not so much units, but teams of Syrian nationals that can go in as specialists in a whole range of issues, air support, medical support, logistics support, and aid these units in the field.
Exactly. Now, we're very transactional in this, so we are giving some equipment, seeing how they perform, give some more equipment and help, see how they perform. But these are groups that already exist. The Syrian Arab Coalition moving in the areas north of Raqqa is an example of that.
Thank you. General Dunford, you just returned from Iraq, and you had conversations with the Prime Minister Abadi, because there were disconcerting reports of invitations to the Russians, collaboration at the intelligence level with the Russians. What's your latest estimate of that? Is it something that was a more political statement by the Prime Minister, or is there actual ongoing real efforts?
Senator, thanks. I asked that specific question to all the senior Iraqi leaders that I met with, and I explained to them how difficult it would be for us to continue to provide support if the Russians were invited in to conduct airstrikes, and I was assured at every level that that wouldn't be the case. Could I follow up on the training equipment?
Yes, sir.
In your opening statement, you mentioned that we completely suspended the program, and I just wanted to clarify one point. The individuals that we had previously trained, we are still supporting them when they're still in the fight. And there are a number of them that are doing exactly the kind of things you spoke about, Senator Reid. They're providing JTAC-like support for forces that are fighting ISIL.
And it's based on the Secretary's comments, it's our intention to expand that as rapidly as we can.
Where there are opportunities, and I would just say, you know, for the T&E program, although we're talking now about the Syrian Arab Coalition and training those large groups, my perception of the guidance that we have from the President is where there are other opportunities, we should bring those forward to him. And when I talked to the team on the ground, I made that clear to them that when we see opportunities, we ought to develop concept of operations, bring that back, and expand the program where it will work. And we'll look to do that both in the northern part in Syria as well as along the Jordanian border.
One final question, General Dunford, is that, and both your testimonies highlighted this inability of the government in Baghdad to fully support Sunni forces in Anbar particularly, and some of that is historic mistrust, et cetera. From your testimony, you're considering having American advisors, not at the company level, but higher up. And one function they could perform is to be an honest broker, which would allow the payment of troops, would allow the government of Baghdad to feel that they have some control, and in addition, demand on behalf of Sunni forces that they get the fair share. Is that part of your thinking going forward?
It is, Senator. I think there's actually 4 reasons why you might consider putting forces in a company role. The first is what you're suggesting, which is really to bring some campaign coherence. I think the other is to ensure that our logistic support is effective. Another challenge we've had is situational awareness and intelligence, and so that would be another advantage of doing that. And then also the better delivery of combined arms. So there's really 4 factors I think that would be considered, and if it had operational or strategic impact, and we could reinforce success, that would be the basic framework within which I'd make a recommendation for additional forces to be co-located with Iraqi units.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Just to make the record clear, Secretary Carter, there are coalition-supported and American-supported forces that are in Syria that are being attacked by Russian aircraft. Is that true or false?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. There are moderate Syrian opposition forces
Coalition
in Syria, supported by the coalition, and of course, people that we think are part of Syria's future and part of the Syrian political transition.
It's hard to be part
They
of.
are being attacked, and not ISIL, and that's why the Russian approach is backwards, or
And that's
I've
why-
called it wrong-headed.
And that's why it's immoral to train people in and watch them, to go in and fight and watch them being destroyed and maimed and killed.
For
by
our
Russian
part,
aircraft.
for our part, in our train and equip program, as I said before this committee before, we have a moral obligation.
You
to
are
protect
making
them.
a distinction without a difference, Mr. Secretary. These are American-supported and coalition-supported men who are going in and being slaughtered. Secretary, Senator.
Yes, my understanding, Mr. Chairman, that Senator Cotton is presiding, so I'll defer to him and then ask that we return to regular order.
Thank you, Senator Inhofe. Yes, I'd have to go preside over the Senate. General Dunford, that's the Senate equivalent of staff duty for a junior officer. Secretary Carter, you talked about our 9 lines of effort. Not all of those are military lines of effort. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now that General Allen has departed as our envoy in charge of those 9 lines of effort, who are minding those non-defense lines of effort?
Well, it's a good question, and one of the things that I have proposed, and Secretary Kerry has accepted, that he and I meet periodically with the other agency heads who have the other lines of effort. General Allen's been present at those meetings. His successor, Ambassador McGurk, will be present at them. And I thought, it's one of the things I noticed when I began to look at this campaign, that since all of these lines of effort it is necessary to have moving in concert, we needed a better effort to do that. So Secretary Kerry's agreed to do that with me. We've had, I think, 4 meetings. General Dunford was at the last one, focused on counter financing was the last one. Before that was foreign fighter flow, both into the conflict region and out of the conflict region to Europe, around the world. We are addressing messaging and ISIL's messages and efforts to recruit people online. So there are lots of different dimensions to this that are not military per se, but I believe that there are opportunities to make the whole greater than the sum of the parts, and I've sought to seize those opportunities with Secretary Kerry, now with General Dunford, and make sure that all these different efforts are coordinated. They're all important, and the other participants are doing important things, the diplomatic people and the intelligence people and the Homeland Security and law enforcement folks, but I think the whole can be greater than the sum of the parts, and just per your question, that's exactly the intent.
Is that a detailed way of saying there's not a single person taking over all of the non-defense lines of effort?
There has not been a single person who had that responsibility. Remember, General Allen, who was superb, General Allen had the responsibility for assembling the coalition, which he did with great skill, and to his credit and Ambassador McGurk's, we have a broad coalition. I'm talking about something different, which is assembling the mechanics of all of the 9 lines of effort. And so that's something I'm undertaking to do with Secretary Kerry, and we're gathering in the other parties that are involved, and Ambassador McGurk will be part of that effort. But I think it's necessary.
Okay, I'd like to shift
organizational change.
I'd like to shift briefly now to Russia's move into Syria. A few weeks ago, before the major Russian movement into Syria, the United States government requested that Bulgaria and Iraq close its airspace to Russian aircraft. How did we transmit that request to Iraq?
I do not know what the mechanics of that were. Can I get back to you on that, Senator? I simply don't know.
Is that something the State Department would
Happy to.
typically do, the Department of Defense, the White House?
Joe, go ahead.
Senator, I believe that message would have been delivered by Ambassador Jones in Baghdad.
And Iraq obviously declined our request while Bulgaria accepted it
Declined a request.
and let Russian aircraft fly through their airspace.
There has been Russian aircraft that's flown through Iraqi airspace. My understanding is it was not at the invitation of the Iraqi government.
Does the Iraq Air Force have the capability to protect its own Air Force and exclude a foreign Air Force like Russia's?
They have limited capability, Senator. They recently were fielded with F-16s, but they have limited air-to-air capability.
So if the United States government requested that the government of Iraq close its airspace to Russia, surely the United States government was prepared to assist Iraq in closing its airspace and stopping Russian aircraft from flying over Iraq?
Well, it's a sovereign decision by Iraq, but I'll tell you, we're not uninterested in it. But you're raising a very important question, which is, is Iraq going to cooperate with the Russian, what I would regard as I've called it wrong-headed approach in Syria. We have received, and I believe that General Dunford received just last week from Prime Minister Abadi in no uncertain terms, the statement that he will not work with the Russians. He will not allow them to be partners with Iraq. In that regard, that we are the preferred partners of Iraq. We've been insistent on that point, and Prime Minister Abadi has repeated those pledges to us. I only say that because we feel emphatically about that, receiving those pledges, and intend to have them implemented by Prime Minister Abadi, but he has not been ambiguous about that. And I believe the most recent conversation was held by General Dunford, and perhaps you'd like to say something about that. Just a serious issue.
No, Senator, I raised it both with the Minister of Defense and the Prime Minister, and again, tried to explain to them that our continued support really would be problematic were they to invite the Russians in to conduct strikes. I was assured that they had not extended that invitation, and they did not intend to extend an invitation to do that.
Well, in closing, I would say it's problematic for Russia to be resupplying its forces in Syria by flying through Iraq. We should renew our request that they exclude Russian aircraft from their airspace, and our military should be prepared to assist them in excluding Russian aircraft from their airspace. Thank you, Senator Inhofe. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you both for your service and for being here. I think my question would be, what is our end game? And the end game would be, we've been there bogged down for quite some time, and if you look at, when I go home to West Virginia and talk to the citizens, you know, they said, well, to stop this migration, you're going to have a no-fly zone. You have to have protection where people feel like they're safe. And as the country regroups or rebuilds, that there are still people there that basically are peace-loving, well-educated. So we haven't made a decision on that, and I know the chairman's asked directly on that. And then I start looking at basically with Russia's involvement and Russia being involved to protect Assad. Russia's more involved in protecting Assad and working with Iran to have some influence of what happens there, in my evaluation. And then you look at the United States. We're more concerned about fighting ISIL, if you will, or it looks to be, more so than protecting or fighting with our coalition who wants to defeat Assad. So what would be the end game, and what part are we going to be able to play in this, unless we take on Russia or basically check Russia from what they're doing, unless we have some type of diplomatic relations with Russia and an agreement with Russia. I see Russia as being in a situation, and they've involved themselves, to where they're going to be a major broker in that region, because Iran seems to be, if you will, more influential as far as in Iraq and in Syria, with Assad, now with Assad being helped and propped up by Russia. We're out there fighting ISIL. We're not protecting the people that can basically put any security back into Syria. It's a very confusing situation. It's hard for us to say, okay, at the end of the day, here's our end game. And if somebody has any explanation for that and tells me what we're trying to accomplish, I'd be happy to hear it.
I'll take that, Senator. For us, the paramount objective is the defeat of ISIL. that will require.
That's our number one priority right now
Iraq,
in
because
Syria.
they're trying to attack Americans.
I got
So
you.
we have to take that very
Okay.
seriously. They must be defeated, and they must
And
be
you agree,
defeated where-
I'm sorry, Mr.
Sorry.
Secretary, you do agree that Russia's primary is to protect Assad?
Yeah, they said they were going to fight ISIL, and that's not what they're doing.
Okay,
They're
so
propping up Assad, which just fuels the civil war, which is the point the chairman was making.
Okay.
And fuels the.
So we have two
they're
different
on the-
objectives
they're on
right
the
now. The
wrong
United States
side
and
of
Russia
this.
has two complete different objectives.
Well, they say they have the same objectives,
But we don't see that.
actions
I got you.
belie that.
And they're basically in line with Iran in helping prop up Assad and protect Assad.
Iran has also supported Assad absolutely as well. And so to get to the question of the end game in Syria has to be a transition in which Assad is no longer running the country. We would like to see that transition occur in as peaceful and prompt a way as possible, because we would like there to be
Is it obvious that basically that Russia and Iran will have more influence on who the next leader or the leadership of Syria is going to be than we will?
Well, I think that I don't think they can be sure of that, because
But I'm saying they're positioning themselves for that.
The future of Syria will be in the hands of the Syrian people, and many of those are Syrian moderate opposition leaders who are being attacked by Assad's forces with Russia's help right now.
Have we
That's
been
why
able to
Russia's on
assess the
wrong side.
migration of the people from Syria as being
Some of
more of the leaders,
some of them.
more of the well-educated, more of the peace-loving?
Yes, there's a spectrum there that goes all the way over to true extremists like al-Nusra and ISIL, all the way through groups.
Can I ask General
much more moderate.
Dunford if on this, General, I know we've talked before on some of this, but it's just it's so hard to go home and explain our involvement unless we're going to have a no-fly and protect those who want to be there to rebuild their country. We're not going to have much to work with.
The chairman said something important in his opening comments, and I think that's exactly what the military campaign is designed to do, and that's to provide some leverage. And I think what we owe the president is options that will allow us to generate the kind of momentum and confidence in the military campaign against ISIL that will give us leverage politically. So the decision's been made that the issue with Assad is being solved politically right now. So I think there's two separate approaches here in Syria that will come together at some point in the future. One is that we're dealing with ISIL on the ground, and we're doing that militarily, and that's with the strikes and the partnership capacity that I spoke about a minute ago. Meanwhile, there are broader political negotiations that are taking place to determine the future of the transitional government. I think right now it's pretty clear to me what we should be doing on the military side, and that is taking the fight to ISIL, generating momentum, keeping the coalition together, giving confidence in the campaign, and then again,
If I can
the chairman
just,
talked about
Mr. Chairman, if you indulge us one more. If I can just ask, is the rebels or the coalition forces which we are supporting in Syria, are they more intent on fighting Assad or fighting ISIL?
The individuals that we are supporting, specifically those in the north, are fighting ISIL.
More so than Assad?
More so than Assad.
Even
That
though-
includes the Syrian Arab Coalition and the YPG and some smaller groups that we've supported. And we have some other groups that we're beginning to negotiate with in the south that have expressed the same intent.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our committee rules have always been to submit the statements 24 hours in advance, and it's really helpful to us if we can get that, and so I'd ask you in future hearings to do that. I appreciate the fact that both the chairman and you, Secretary Carter, mentioned by name Josh Wheeler. Josh Wheeler is from Roland, Oklahoma. He's one who is certainly he was a hero before all this happened, and by his actions, he saved 70 lives of hostages and fellow members of the coalition task force, and so I appreciate very much your talking about him. Since you were here before, Secretary Carter, in July, ISIL still controls much of the northern and western Iraq, despite more than a year of U.S. airstrikes and the loss of Ramadi. Significant setback. Russia continued its military buildup in Syria, as we've been talking about, and began operations to support Iraq. Iran-Quds forces in Syria have been joined by Iranian support forces from Lebanon's Hezbollah to support the Assad regime, all under the command of General Soleimani, who previously directed attacks on U.S. forces in Iraq. And we talked about the change in the train and equip program, which I would like to have you elaborate a little bit more on. But in your statement that we got this morning, Secretary Carter, you said, quote, "To be clear, we are not cooperating with Russia, and we are not letting Russia impact the pace and scope of our campaign against ISIL in Iraq and Syria." Last week we had, some time ago, we had Dr. Kissinger in as a witness, but then last week we had 5 professors that were there in one of our really good hearings that we had on, I think it's on Wednesday or Thursday. And we quoted Dr. Kissinger when he said, quote, "Syria is the latest symptom of a disintegration of the American role in stabilizing the Middle East order," unquote. Now, do you think that's inconsistent with the statements that you've made, Secretary Carter?
I think that the Middle East is certainly a very tumultuous, but once again, I come back to our role is to protect American interests in that circumstance.
Yeah, but
that's what we're doing, whether it be the fight against ISIL, our alliances and partnerships with Gulf countries, and Israel, our posture in the Gulf, all of that is intended to protect American interests in the Middle East. And is the Middle East tumultuous? You bet it is. But our anchor is the protection.
Well, when I read your statement, it seemed to me that it's not totally consistent with that. What do you think, General Dunford, about Kissinger's statement in terms of our role in that part of the world?
Senator, thanks. I mean, what I would agree with former Secretary Kissinger is that we have a critical role to play in the Middle East. We have national interests in the Middle East, and we should be decisively engaged in advancing those national interests.
Yeah, okay, but and I know this is about the Middle East, but in Ukraine is another good example of what our posture is in that part of the world. And a lot of us here were actually, well, I was there during the last election that they had in October, when for the first time in 96 years, they don't have one communist in their parliament in the Ukraine. It's Poroshenko and Yatsenyuk, and they're all, that was a pro-Western effort. And then immediately Putin started killing them all. And our response was sending blankets and K-rations. Well, they don't call them K-rations anymore. But anyway, do you agree, General Dunford, that this is the right response that we should have had to maintain what you have always perceived to be our role?
Senator, I don't want to be evasive, but I'm not sure it'd be appropriate for me to comment on an issue of policy and what we ought to do. I mean, I think my job is to provide military options to our leadership in support of the policy.
Okay, let me ask you a question, because I don't know. What is the current status of Fallujah?
Fallujah right now is being held by insurgents, and that is one of the areas that's been identified for future operations by Iraqi security forces.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, that's, you know.
Comforting to know it's been identified.
All right, well, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Heinrich, you can't make it up.
Secretary Carter, if there is one lesson it seems to me we should have learned in the Middle East and North Africa by now, it's that every time we think it can't get worse, if there's not an end game, it can. Removing Saddam Hussein at the cost of thousands of American lives gave us a chaotic civil war and ethnic war that led to the vacuum that helped spawn ISIL. In Libya, we removed a brutal dictator only to see chaos and extremism reign across what can now only loosely be called a country. So to reference Senator Manchin's comments that we need to think about an end game here, I think about the fact that many of our colleagues now believe that the solution to Syria today is to focus directly on the removal of the Assad regime rather than the current administration focus on ISIL. So I want to ask you, were the Assad regime to fall without a plan in place for follow-on governance and a political settlement that could create some sort of stability, how confident are you that Syria wouldn't just slip into an even more chaotic state, potentially threatening our allies in the region, creating new opportunities for ISIL, and creating a new wave of refugees that could make the current outpouring of refugees look modest?
Well, the end game we seek is both the defeat of ISIL and a transition in Syria. And you're right, the sooner that occurs, the more likely it is that the structures of Syrian society aren't completely destroyed by the time that transition occurs. That's why hastening that political transition, Assad out, and the political forces, to include the moderate Syrian forces now opposing Assad, have the opportunity to rebuild the country. That's the only way to put Syria back together, and the sooner that occurs, the better. That's why we're supporting that political transition. But at the same time, we have to defeat ISIL. They have to be militarily defeated. There's no other.
My point with respect to Assad is that should Assad fall, we need to be thinking about what comes next. So it's not just an opportunity for ISIL and other extremist groups in the region.
I believe that the talks that Secretary Kerry is having with various parties in the region this week are precisely aimed at deciding what the contours of that political settlement would be and what would come after it. But one of the reasons why it's so important that this occur quickly is that the structures of the Syrian state are going to be important to the future, and we don't want them to disintegrate entirely. And that's why fueling the Syrian civil war, which is what the Russians are doing, is so wrong-headed.
General Dunford, with respect to the potential no-fly zone issue that was brought up earlier, what would be the limitations of that kind of course of action, given particularly the new, fairly sophisticated air defenses from Russia that are now inside Syria?
Senator, from a military perspective, we can implement a no-fly zone, and we have the capability to do that. The challenges are political, legal, and then a diversion of the resources that are currently fighting ISIL in support of that no-fly zone. So those are among the factors that were considered when we looked at the no-fly zone.
Moving back to you, Secretary Carter, during your previous appearance before this committee in July, you emphasized that Prime Minister Abadi was doing everything he could to recruit Sunnis to the fight. And I think you said that, quote, only Sunnis can take back Anbar. Do you still feel this way? And can you update the committee on the progress or lack of progress in training Iraqi security forces?
It is still true. The recapture of western Iraq is going to require Sunni forces that participate in that recapture, and then, of course, that keep the peace after the peace is won. That's why we're so intent on getting Sunni fighters into the fight. And the legacy of Prime Minister Maliki was to make the armed forces of Iraq more sectarian to the detriment of the Sunnis. That's one of the things that led to ISIL. I think that Prime Minister Abadi is trying, but I think I'm going to be honest with you, Iraq needs to do more.
A lot of that damage has been done.
But if we're going to reverse it, we need to try to recruit, pay, arm, and equip Sunni forces. That is our purpose. That's what we're doing with the Iraqis, and that needs to be part of the future. If I can also address the no-fly zone, I just want to be clear. We have studied the no-fly zone. As the chairman's absolutely right. One knows how to do that. And I thought I'll give you some of the considerations that go into that. And by the way, the President hasn't taken anything like this off the table. You asked whether we've recommended that at this stage. We've not. A no-fly zone would be intended to prevent the Syrian Air Force from, as the chairman said, barrel bombing or otherwise using air power, both fixed wing and rotary wing, against the civilian population. Where they're doing that is over in the western part of the country, which is not the area where we're flying in now, because we're flying and attacking ISIL further to the east. That area is protected by the Syrian Integrated Air Defense System. So were we to fly there, we would need to deal with the Syrian Integrated Air Defense System, which is a substantial undertaking of its own that we have, as the chairman indicated, analyzed, and we certainly have capabilities to do. Then we would be interdicting both fixed-wing and rotary-wing aircraft that were attacking the Syrian population. I should note that, however, that most of the civilian casualties inflicted by Assad's forces on the civilian population have been from artillery, and obviously this wouldn't do anything about artillery, but it would do something about airstrikes. It's a substantial new undertaking. We've analyzed it. We've not made the recommendation to do it at this time, but I respect people who are making recommendations for these kinds of zones, and then there are also humanitarian zones, which have been referenced also, which are a portion of Syria, now speaking conceptually, where people could congregate and be protected. Now, a zone thus created would be contested by ISIL, by al-Nusra at a minimum, and so it would have to be defended. So again, it's a substantial military undertaking. The people who live there would therefore take a ground force with accompanying air forces to accomplish that. And the people who were protected could be people who lived there, or, and I think some people who have moved into Turkey, whom Turkey wishes to move back. But I just want to be clear that to keep it safe would require fighting to keep it safe, because the people who want to terrorize the population would attempt to attack such a zone. So you need to think in each case, and we've thought through several different cases, who's in, who is kept out, and how the enforcement of it is done. So there are air zones and there are ground zones. We have considered all of them. And again, the President hasn't taken anything off the table. We've not made any specific recommendations in that regard, but we've looked at a variety of such possibilities. Let me ask the Chairman, you got anything to add to that?
Senator Graham.
Thank you to my colleagues for letting me jump ahead. I appreciate it very, very much. I want to see if I've got this right. We're going to train people inside of Syria to fight ISIL rather than training them outside of Syria. Equip them inside and train them inside, right? New strategy.
Yes, that's where they are.
Okay, so, count me in for trying to help. Do we still want to replace Assad?
Absolutely. I think
Is that a goal of ours?
yes, a transition from Assad to a government of Syria that is
General
inclusive
Dunford.
and moderate and together. Absolutely.
Right, General Dunford. Is it smart to let Russia fight ISIL and we stay out of the fight?
Russia's not fighting ISIL, Senator.
But that wouldn't be a good idea to rely on Russia to fight ISIL for us.
Senator, I think we need to be engaged in advancing our own national interests. We have a national interest in dealing with ISIL, and we should be doing that.
Okay, here's the
We can do it more
question.
effectively. I'm not confident that Russia is effective at doing that.
I'm 1,000,000% with you. Are we going to supply air support for the people we train to fight ISIL?
We are, Senator.
Do those same people want to take Assad down?
The ones that we are supporting right now are focused on ISIL.
Do they have a goal to take Assad down?
Senator, I don't know.
What do you mean you don't know?
Well, the ones we're supporting, I don't know, because the folks.
Don't you think most people in Syria want two things? They want to fight, they want to destroy ISIL and get rid of Assad, the person who's killed 250,000 of their family? Is that really a mystery?
No, it's not.
It's not a mystery. Okay, is Russia going to fight for Assad?
Russia is fighting for Assad.
Will Iran fight for Assad?
They are doing that, Senator.
Will Hezbollah fight for Assad?
They are doing that.
When the people we train to fight ISIL turn on Assad, which they surely will, are we going to fight with them to replace Assad?
I can't answer that question, Senator.
Can you answer it, Secretary Carter?
Yeah, just to be clear, let's take the
That day is coming.
YPG Kurds.
Do you see a scenario where the
Let me
people in
just
Syria
address
don't take
people
on a
The
side?
people that we are equipping are people who live in or come from ISIL-occupied territory, and they're
Do they
very
want to
bent
take a side
on
down?
defeating ISIL and
Do
going.
they want to take a side down?
For the most part, they're focused on defeating.
Do they
ISIL.
want to take a side? Have you asked them?
We know what their intent is, and it is to fight ISIL.
Come on.
They're fighting ISIL now.
You know as well as I do, both of you know, that the average Syrian not only wants to destroy ISIL, but they're intent on destroying Assad because he's killed 250,000 of them. And here's the question for this committee. How do we leverage Assad leaving when Russia's going to fight for him, Iran's going to fight for him, Hezbollah's fight for him, and we're not going to do a damn thing to help people take him down? And y'all both know that. So when Kerry goes over to Geneva, he is turning over Syria to the Russians and to the Iranians. Is there any credible military threat to Assad now that Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah is on his side? Do you see any credible military threat to take him down, General Dunford?
I think the balance of forces right now are in Assad's advantage.
Not his advantage. He is secure as the day is long. So this is what's happened, folks. This strategy is completely falling apart. Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah are going to fight for their guy, and we're not going to do a damn thing to help the people who want to change Syria for the better by getting rid of the dictator in Damascus. Do you see a scenario, Secretary Carter, where we would fight to support an effort to take Assad down, that we would fight alongside of people who want to take Assad down in Syria? Is that remotely possible?
Our approach to removing Assad has been to.
Does it have a military component?
It is principally a political effort in Syria.
So the
Our
answer
military
is
effort in
no.
Syria, our military effort.
Are we going to fight with people who want to take Assad down? Are we going to provide them military help?
Our train and equip program.
The answer is no. The answer is no.
Supportive of people who
So
are fighting
let me
ISIL.
just end this. If I'm Assad, this is a good day for me, because the American government has just said, without saying it, that they're not going to fight to replace me. The Russians and the Iranians and Hezbollah, this is a really good day for them, because their guy has no military credible threat. So, now you tell me what kind of deal we're going to get, folks. I'm sure we'll get a really good deal with this construct. So what you've done, gentlemen, along with the President, is you've turned Syria over to Russia and Iran. You've told the people in Syria who've died by the hundreds of thousands, we're more worried about a political settlement than we are about what follows. All I can say, this is a sad day for America, and the region will pay hell for this, because the Arabs are not going to accept this. The people in Syria are not going to accept this. This is a half-assed strategy at best.
Since a quorum is now present, I ask the committee to consider a list of 1,663 pending military nominations. All of these nominations have been before the committee the required length of time. Is there a motion so favorably report these 1,663 nominations to the Senate? Is there a second? All in favor say aye. The motion carries. Senator Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for your service and testimony. Secretary Carter, you stated that the primary objective of our actions, as you've described this morning, is the defeat of ISIL, and I want to dig into that a little bit. Currently, I think I'm right on this, we are engaged in activities against ISIL, military activities in Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, Yemen, Libya. And then when we were on during that week of congressional recess, the President sent to Congress a War Powers letter indicating the detachment of, I think, 300 American troops to Cameroon to assist in activities against Boko Haram, which has pledged allegiance to ISIL. have I omitted any countries where there is currently activity that is either ISIL activity or groups that have pledged allegiance to ISIL?
We're watching ISIL all over the world, Senator. As you know, it has aspirations and tries to metastasize, uses the web. I mean, we have had, and Director Comey's made this very clear, Americans who have self-radicalized.
That's going to be my
So
next
this is
question.
a phenomenon that is around the world. We're watching it around the world, not just ourselves, but in law enforcement and intelligence circles. It's one of the reasons why ISIL needs to be defeated.
In terms of kind of kinetic activities by the military, though, am I right that currently it's Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, Yemen, Libya, and then the deployment of troops to Cameroon?
It depends on what you mean by that. You want to go ahead, Joe?
Senator, we don't currently have operations ongoing in Yemen, direct operations against ISIL. We don't have operations against Libya against ISIL. And our support in Cameroon is ISR support in support of operations against Boko Haram.
Okay.
But just to be
Secretary
clear, we
Carter-
can get you what we're doing in each country, but it's...
And I don't want to get into asking about non-DOD title activities, so I'll omit that. But just, I think the record and the public record about activities in those countries is fairly plain. Secretary Carter, you indicate we're watching ISIL in other countries. Is it fair to assume, based on your joint professional judgment, that ISIL continues to mutate and find adherents in other countries, and we may well have to contemplate DOD activity against ISIL in nations other than those that I've mentioned?
It could come to that, and that's why I think we need to kill the source of it, which is in Syria and Iraq.
Is it fair to assume, you know, we pray that this is not the case, but that the death of Master Sergeant Wheeler may not be the last death of an American service member in this campaign to defeat ISIL?
I think we need to be realistic. We are, our people will be in positions. They are right now, every day. There are people flying right now. There are people training and advising forces there, and they are in harm's way. There's no doubt about it.
And we've lost service personnel before Master Sergeant Wheeler, not necessarily in direct combat or kinetic activities, but as you say, they were in positions of danger because of their support for this mission against ISIL.
Yes, make no mistake. They are in harm's way in this fight against ISIL, no doubt about it.
In your professional judgment, your notion that the primary objective is the defeat of ISIL, how long will that take?
It needs to be, I can't tell you how long it will take, but I think that it needs to be soon, which is why we're so intent upon strengthening our effort, which is why we're working with the Iraqis and trying to get them to field more Sunni forces, strengthening our training and equipping of Sunni forces, why we're prepared to do more with those forces in Iraq. The President's indicated that and indicated a willingness for the chairman and me to make recommendations in that regard, so to enable those Sunni forces so that they can take back the Sunni territories of Iraq. And over in Syria, it's Raqqa. And that's why the coalition forces that are intent, to get back to the question that Senator Graham was raising, they want to attack Raqqa. And take back Raqqa, which is occupied by ISIL, and they therefore deserve our support and are receiving our support.
Mr. Secretary, when you say soon, let's just be realistic sitting here today. Aren't we talking, I mean, with all the countries that we've mentioned and your acknowledged possibility that there could be more, aren't we talking about an effort that is likely to be a multi-year effort, certainly well into the next administration?
That's probably the case, and the reason is that the strategy is to, and this is an important part of the strategy, and we've said it right from the very beginning, is to support capable and motivated forces that can retake and hold territory, not to try to substitute for them. That's the only way to have a lasting victory. And that it takes some time to identify those forces, to motivate those forces, to train those forces, and it depends upon the political circumstances in both Iraq and Syria. So it does depend upon the political circumstances. That isn't something that is anything other than a very real factor there. But that's necessary in order to have a lasting defeat, because we want ISIL not only to be defeated, but it has to stay defeated. And that means the people who live there need to govern themselves and restore the peace and order. And that's what takes the time, is to develop those forces. And it is hard work, but that's what we're doing in Iraq, and that's what we're doing in the new train and equip program in Syria. It will take some time.
Mr. Chair, I'll just conclude and say that I think that answer about the complexity and the fact that this, under any circumstances, is going to take significant time is a very relevant one for us. The administration's position about the authority to wage this war is based upon an authorization that was passed on September 18, 2001, before many of us were here, that specifically says the President is authorized to use force against those who planned, authorized, committed, or aided the terrorist attacks that occurred on September 11, 2001. And I would just renew my observation that I think it would have been far beyond the contemplation of the members of Congress who voted on that at the time, and it's certainly beyond the contemplation of those of us who did not vote on that at the time, that those words would be applying 15 years later to an effort in the countries I just mentioned that may mutate to other countries, that is, by the admission of our witnesses today, likely to take a good deal more. I think it's very much time that Congress revisit the question of this authorization and try to provide some underlying legal justification for the ongoing military action. With that, Mr. Chair, I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Carter, would you assess ISIL and al-Nusra to be among the most capable rebel groups that are on the Syrian battlefield?
I would. They're ferocious. They're extremely cruel and brutal. And, of course, some of the forces that are not trying to brutalize the population but trying to fight Assad are, as has been indicated, more moderate Syrian forces, and they don't behave that way, and that's why they deserve to be and will be part of the Syrian political future after Assad.
Are you concerned that the Russian and Iranian attacks are going to further polarize the battlefield, and we're going to see more moderate fighters cooperate with ISIL and al-Nusra because those groups are more capable?
Well, that's precisely the point I've made to the Russians. The way I put it is they're pouring gasoline on the civil war in Syria by supporting Iraq, and they're going to enhance the very extremism that they say they fear, and they have every reason to fear, because now ISIL and other groups, including Syrian opposition groups of all stripes, are turned against Russia. And Russia's had very bitter experience with extremism in their own country. And this is why their actions are not consistent with their words and are, I keep using the phrase, wrong-headed. They say they're doing one thing and they're actually doing another.
Have you told Russia not to attack units that have been trained by the U.S. or to avoid certain areas where U.S.-affiliated groups may be operating? Or have you indicated to the Russians in any way that the United States will respond to such attacks?
Well, we've certainly indicated that we intend to prosecute our counter-ISIL campaign unchanged, and we don't intend to make any changes in it. We're determined to do that, and we haven't.
So you have communicated to the Russians that if there are attacks on U.S.-trained troops or U.S.-trained units in any way, that we will respond? I
said earlier in this testimony, I said publicly that we have an obligation to the forces that we've trained and equipped to protect them, and we intend to do that.
But that does not include the coalition-trained troops, units, is that correct?
Well, we don't control all of the opposition forces to Assad. This gets back to the earlier question. Our train and equip program that the Department of Defense runs is oriented towards fighters whose principal preoccupation is fighting ISIL. There are others who are fighting Assad, and they do come under attack by the Russians, and that's why, and because some of them deserve to be part of the Syrian political future, that's a serious mistake on Russia's part.
Would it be a serious mistake on Russia's part to attack any units that have been trained by other agencies besides the Department of Defense? Would we have a response in that case?
That's something we'd have to talk about separately, Senator.
Undersecretary Warmouth stated that Article 2 of the Constitution allows the President to use force against Assad if he attacked Syrian rebels trained by the U.S. I would assume that a similar determination has been made with respect to using force against Russian planes if they attack U.S.-trained rebels. Is that true?
Let me just repeat what I said about for the Department of Defense forces that we are training and equipping in Syria. We have an obligation to protect them. They're fighting ISIL. They're far from the territory that is contested or where the Russians are operating, but we do have an obligation to defend them. With respect to other Syrian opposition forces and so forth, that's something we'd have to discuss in a closed.
Would the United States take action against Russian planes if Russian planes were attacking U.S.-trained units?
Just to repeat, we have indicated that we have an obligation, we have options to protect our people whom we've trained against attack.
I would appreciate if you could provide us with some more information for the record, specifically if United States forces have the legal authority to intervene if Assad's forces attack U.S.-trained fighters, but not if Russia attacks such fighters. If you could provide some clarification there, specifically legal authority.
Will do, but the short form is, as I said, we have an obligation. I believe we have the legal authority to do that, but I'm happy to put that in more detail. And then there are other aspects that you're alluding to that we'd simply have to talk about in closed session.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Secretary, before Senator Graham began his important line of questioning, I wrote in my notes, the opposition will never push Assad out as long as Russia and Iran are all in. I think that's just the reality. And the question is, what do we do about that? And there will be no we can't say, well, there'll be a political solution, there'll be negotiations. The negotiations will flow out of the military situation. They've already shown they're not going to negotiate as long as they think they're solidly in power, which they clearly think they do. On the other hand, talking about a no-fly zone, which would bring us in direct conflict with the Russian Air Force, raises very large geopolitical questions. But give me some more thoughts on Senator Graham's line of questioning. Let's be realistic. Wishing is not going to make a policy. Assad is going to be there as long as Russia and Iran are willing to stay all in. How do we change their calculus without a significant additional commitment of military power?
Two things. First of all, the Russian support to Assad is having the effect of increasing and catalyzing and motivating the opposition to Assad. And so I believe that both the Russians and the Syrians will see the effects of that on the battlefield. You're right, there will be conditioned by a military situation on the ground there. With respect to the political transition and at what point Russia would recognize that its actions were fueling Syria's civil war and fueling the extremism it fears, I can't speak to that. That is what Secretary Kerry is exploring with the Russians, but I can't say when and whether they will they will reach that conclusion.
They have to decide that ISIS is a bigger threat to them than the loss of Assad. And I don't know when that's going to occur, but I agree with you. That's the narrow diplomatic opening. But right now, they seem to be trying to have it both ways. And as you point out, they can't. As long as they prop up Assad, they're essentially propping up ISIS. Because
This is the logical contradiction in their approach. There's no question about it. I've said that from the day that it started, and I said that to the Russian counterparts, why it's so wrong-headed, their approach. And at what stage they'll recognize that, I don't know. I do commend Secretary Kerry for talking to them and trying to find a different way, but they'd have to reach that recognition. And a part of that will be learned on the battlefield, and part of it will be learned in terms of extremism and how it is turned on Russia.
But I think the question that the administration has to address is how do we ratchet up pressure on Assad to change the military calculus in such a way that it's going to move that calculation. Let me just change the subject for a minute. Both of you used the term with regard to the Iraqi army, capable, motivated Iraqi forces. Isn't that an oxymoron? You yourself have pointed out that that's what's been missing in Iraq. Is there any likelihood that that's changing?
There are some, but not nearly enough. For example, the counterterrorism service, the Iraqi counterterrorism service, which has been trained by the United States over time, is an effective, capable, motivated force. What we lack enough of in Iraq are capable and motivated Sunni forces. That is the type of force that is in short supply, and that is why it's so important that the government of Iraq continue to recruit Sunnis, pay them. We will equip them and train them, and we'll support them in the battlefield. But it will require Sunni forces to retake Sunni territory.
Does Abadi understand that in his gut, or is he just giving lip service to this inclusion? Because if he doesn't, if this isn't real inclusion, we're sunk.
He has been consistent in what he has told us.
But is his actions, are his actions bearing that out?
I think you have to be, I'd have to be candid and say that Prime Minister Abadi does not have his complete sway over everything that happens in Iraq. We have insisted that anything we do to support Iraqi forces must be by and through the government of Iraq. But very clearly, and you see it, there are militias of various kinds, Shia militias that are inadequately under the control of the government of Baghdad, and that's one of the challenges there. But the forces we support are those that are under the control of Prime Minister Abadi, and I have talked to him, and I believe he is sincere in wanting to do the right thing there. But again, wanting to do the right thing and having a complete authority are two different things in Baghdad. I think his authority is growing in that regard, but we do not yet have all the Sunni forces recruited, paid, enrolled, trained, and so forth that we need and want.
Well, I certainly hope we'll use our influence to the maximum, because if that inclusion doesn't happen, then this whole enterprise is for naught. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.